Great. Welcome, everybody. It's the Tinderbox Meetup for Sunday, the 23rd of April, 2023. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox, and here is Michael Becker.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the meetup. The typical format of the meetup is we go around and people introduce each other. The whole purpose of these is for us to get to understand learning and knowledge management in the context of the Tinderbox universe about this tool and all the tools that wrap around it and the processes, et cetera, and the different thinking and approaches that we all take to learning. Typically what we do is we go around the room and we have new people introduce themselves if they would like. Then we jump into either the theme for the day or specific issues that people have. And then we do any kind of crazy stuff at the end of the hour and a half if we have time. So we actually have a theme for today, and we also have a bunch of new people. So if we can go around the room, for those that are interested, if you can just kind of say hi and let us know what you're doing. Like, I don't think I've seen Jim's computer before. Curtis, I think I've seen before, but don't really recall. Kenneth James is new to me. You guys want to chime in and kind of introduce yourselves to the community, or should we just jump right into our program session for the day? Okay, it doesn't look like anybody's biting on that. So let's, Per Becker, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on these a couple of times, but I'm Per Becker, and I'm very happy about this theme because it was sort of this utility of Tinderbox that I sort of foresaw. That was the reason why I got the program. So I'm very happy to see what others have to say about ZettelKasten and Tinderbox. So so yeah, I'm a professor from Lund University in Sweden.
Welcome, awesome. Okay, Detlef, we haven't seen you in a long time. How you doing?
Oh, I'm fine. I was simply too busy, and I'm happy to see you again all together. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, if nobody else wants to introduce themselves, let's just jump right in. So we have a guest speaker today. Where'd he go on my screen? Sascha, are you around somewhere? There you go, Sascha Fast. So Sascha Fast runs ZettelKasten.de, probably one of the preeminent, if not the most preeminent thought leader in all things ZettelKasten. And so I'm just going to move aside, and Sascha, if you can take it away. I mean, just kind of, so what I think everybody's like wanting to think about is, what is ZettelKasten? How does it work? What are the concepts behind it? Is there some like strict policy, or are there specific tools? Maybe you can dig into all of those kinds of thoughts and ideas. We can run a Q&A with you, and then perhaps at the end we can do some, if we have time, open up a blank Tinderbox file and do some experiments with the things that you're teaching us, and play some real-time activity with the toys. So awesome. All right. So if you don't mind, take it away. Introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
Julio. Hi, everybody. I'm Sascha from ZettelKasten.de, and I think I will just jump into it with a short introduction and of the ZettelKasten method, not by of myself. I think, as a disclaimer, I tried Tinderbox out a couple of days ago, so I have a rough grasp how it works, and it's like jumping into the space and jumping from planet to planet. This is kind of the feel I get, so very interesting. In short, I would describe the ZettelKasten more or less as using tools of hypertext production to develop an integrated thought environment. So first, integrated means that you integrate various aspects of a thought environment. And a thought environment has it can be broken down into tools. So that can be tools for analysis, that can be creative tools like prompts or something like else. It offers a canvas, so like similar in as a workbench on which you actually work on a thing. And it offers Yeah, the thing itself. So it's kind of circularity because it's all in one. So it's both the thing that you craft and the tools that you are crafting. And of course, you are crafting tools to craft tools to craft tools. So it's a little bit Inception-like. So this is the whole where the whole self-reference reference thing comes from. And the ZettelKasten method in itself is really simple. So it's just creating nodes, connecting nodes, and searching your archive. But where the magic, so to say, happens is that you can exploit several mechanisms over your whole lifetime. So whenever you create a node, there's a chance that you basically digged up some gold. That means what you are writing now could be like highly useful in 10 years from now, and you don't know. This is discussed under or try to discuss under the topic of serendipity, but it's discussed under the topic of serendipity. And the ZettelKasten allows you to first, in principle, just retrieve nodes, and this is more relevant for the digital version. In the analog version, retrieval is much harder and not so much in the center of the ZettelKasten, but in the digital world, you can just have a full text search or a full system search, and you basically just retrieve nodes. But at the same time, you can build things over a long period of time. So for example, I regularly connect nodes that are 8 or 10 years, taken 8 or 10 years apart from each other. And it's just because the ZettelKasten basically offers me some links, and it's not so much that the ZettelKasten does that for me. It's that the ZettelKasten is such a familiar place that I just get the ideas when I'm working in the ZettelKasten. So this is kind of the rough outline of the ZettelKasten method, and working with it is also pretty simple. You just go in there, and it's you just go in there and you include nodes, and then you basically let your thinking manifest itself on the screen or the paper, depending on which tools you use. And this is like pretty much the introduction.
So Sascha, I have a quick question though. So you said
Yes.
3 points that I thought were really important. You noted that ZettelKasten was about creating notes, linking notes and searching the archive.
Mm-hmm.
And then you talked about how over time that allows you to have, you get closer. I'm using my own words in this case. You get closer to your data. You work with it so much, you get immersed into that content. Then you can find those moments of serendipity. I didn't hear you talk about the idea of output or production, however. In the end, don't we also want to focus on the end result of getting some form of output or production, or is it all just collection for collection's sake?
Yeah, that's a tricky point, because when I talk about the ZettelKasten, I mostly talk as if it's just a hammer, and this is because the hammer, or talking about the ZettelKasten as I talked about it, is the most how would you say it, the most inclusive way. So there are huge difference between a ZettelKasten of a historian, of a theologian, of my ZettelKasten, which is very interdisciplinary, of a chemist or something like that. So yes, it's or at least my goal of I use it for like purely for the output. So it's not collecting. It's basically enhancing my thinking. This is actually one of the primary goals for me. So if I would now lose my ZettelKasten, for example, it wouldn't be such a big loss, because of the way I work. It's the training already happened in my brain, and therefore I rarely need to remember any note. So I think I have now 13,000 notes, and I don't recall them. So you can just ask me, okay, what note did you write in 2012? But when I see a note, I mostly recognize it. but it's not because I have a special brain or something like that. It's because of the way I work. So this is, I mentioned it first because it's the most overlooked outcome. It's a training tool for your brain also. And the second one is, of course, then to gear it towards mostly text production, I would say.
And when you say text production, so an output, so some kind of article or something like that, book, etc.
The scale actually doesn't matter because the ZettelKasten has some sort, I would say, I call it self-scaling. So it's not that different to write an article or even an article, a book or book series, because you just focus on one node at a time and finding the right place and finding the connections, and the bigger system will take care of the bigger complexities, which you can access. You can view it with the right tools, but it's not like you have to be on it all the time. So you can write a book, for example, over the course of like 20 years and work for a week each year, and still would be able to finish at least the draft. Then, of course, editing needs to be happen, and editing, as all writers know, is the most laborious part of writing.
Mr. Bernstein. You're on mute, Mark.
I am. You teach people to take better notes. And I think that must be very challenging because notes are one of the things that everyone knows that they're expert on. Could you tell us something about both good notes and bad notes? Not strawman bad notes, but bad notes and bad note practices that you actually see.
Mm-hmm. I think this is actually, or the question is way better, I think, than it looks on the surface, because one of the biggest issues I see, at least during my coaching, is that the notes are really not built to last. This would be the major flaw of a note, because one major flaw of us humans, or let's say instinctual note takers, is to assume that the context will be available to you in like 1 year or 3 months or something like that. And then the regular phenomenon then is that you take a note, and then after 3 months you don't know why you took the note at all. And the most common reason for that is that you had an idea, and this feeling of clarity gets lost then over time. And then without that feeling of clarity, the value of the note somehow seems to diminish. And what I try to really ingrain and condition, I wouldn't so much say to teach, because it's more of a getting on the nerves of the people, is to put the context explicitly in the note. And that doesn't mean like, for example, what inspired you to take the note or something like that, but to, for example, let's say I would take notes that my dog today on my second walk was like really calm and pleasant. And my dog is like really a psycho dog that I try to train. And when I take just the note, in 3 months, I wouldn't know why I took the note. What I would do is, for example, write explicitly about the relevance. And it's not relevant for me now. So if I would take a note on this incident, and I would just write that is relevant for this day, the note wouldn't be valuable even tomorrow, because the relevance is tied for today. So by thinking me about the relevance over the long time, I make it obviously relevant for a long time. So relevance is one thing that is highly useful to add to a note. That might be relevance for a project. So that means when for example, I stumble upon an interesting concept, I don't just write the concept down or the definition of the concept down. I write also down why it is relevant, for example, to a certain line of thinking for a project, or perhaps to other people, or for me personally, or something like that. So this means that I don't create just the note about a concept, but I make the note relevant, like explicitly relevant. And I deem, or I think there are 5 major aspects that make knowledge and or information valuable. And that is truth, relevance, usefulness, beauty, and simpleness. So about relevance, I talked enough, I think. Truth is basically reliability. So that means if I say to you, I don't know, carbs are the worst, and if you eat 1 gram of carbs, you die of whatever, then it might be true or not, but its value comes from the actual truth. So I would provide you with arguments, with evidence, with studies, perhaps with nice rhetoric tricks or something like that. So it makes the statement reliable, and this gives also this is also value giving. Usefulness is most of the time more or less an unfolding of relevance. So most of the time you think about relevance, and then you think about the why of the relevance, and usefulness is the most common thing why a concept might be relevant. So it could be useful to further a project. It could be useful, for example, to simplify a theory or simplify a model or something like that. Beauty is the most difficult aspect, I think. And I always try to explain it on the example of big predatory cats. So when we see big predatory cats, we immediately see the beauty in it. And it's not by chance. It's not that it's just the randomness of the universe made the big predatory cats beautiful to us. It's because of the relationship we have 2 big predatory cats. So first, they are an eye catcher because they are one of the 3 primary predators of us humans and ancestors. So there are 3: cats, snakes, and big birds. And that means they are an eye catcher, but we see the elegance in the movement. We see the efficiency in the movement. So we see hidden qualities of big predatory cats that we deem beautiful. The same with beautiful faces. We see symmetry and so on and so forth, but the beauty doesn't happen just by chance or randomness. It's about the beauty is indicator for charisma, for health, for good immune system, or for good nutrition in the childhood, and whatnot might be included in that. So thinking about beauty, mostly I think about it as engaging the right side of the brain. So the brain that more or less thinks intuitively. As a side note, I really recommend the book The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. And I base a lot of my thinking on this divided brain theory or book that he wrote. And the last one is kind of a trick. It's not so much a direct value-giving aspect of like the others, but simpleness, I think, in 2 dimensions. So first, it's if you can make something simpler, you add value to it. So that means if I can break down like 10 pages of explanation and make it so it's just 2 pages, and I don't lose any explanatory power, for example, I make it more valuable because I can now transport the information more efficient, for example. That means when I take notes and I make them more simple in a way that it's more accessible to our brain, I add in value. And the next aspect of simpleness, making other things more simple. So going back to the carb example, let's say I convinced you that all carbs are bad. It's actually a way to make the diet simpler. That means you can just eat no carbs and you are good. And that's actually one of the key mechanisms why a low carb diet seems to have good outcomes, namely because it's behaviorally very simple. And that is the basis for me how good and bad notes are distinguished. Good notes are notes taken with value-added properties, and bad notes most of the time are just notes that you jot down. Not always, of course, because sometimes you need to you need to write just something down so you have it and can retrieve it. But I would think that these notes have they're in different category. For example, a telephone number, you could put it in a ZettelKasten or your knowledge system that you have. But and it actually works. I sometimes just put information there so I can retrieve it because of the ease of the use of my ZettelKasten. Yeah, basically, I think it's kind of obvious that those are two different categories.
Sascha, before we move on to Mark on that though, what do you do in this context? So you're saying a lot of great stuff, and I'm here rapidly trying to take notes. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between the notes I'm rapidly taking right now, because in this context, it's hard for me to actually grab all of these value-added properties in this moment and in this second. Yeah. So what's the difference between what I'm doing right now, which is this kind of just trying to get as much out down as you're speaking, versus whatever this refined note is? So is the ZettelKasten, is there a difference between like these rapidly captured notes and a refined note that has value-added properties? And can you explain that?
Yeah. So the difference is the difference is its place in the chain of value creation, I might say. So the chain of value creation mostly comes from the one end. So that means like other people's books or something like that. So anything that you retrieve. And the end result of the value chain of knowledge work is, you actually go. So it might be books, articles, but it also means a better management style if you are a manager or whatnot. So this would be the more practical side. And from the beginning to the end, you need an unbroken chain to actually produce something valuable. This is, by the way, I hope, but I will explain it, that most of you have heard from the collector's fallacy. It's a kind of infamous article by Christian, so my best friend. And it says basically, if you collect, you have a false sense of accomplishment, while also not producing the value that you actually want to produce. So it comes from it's inspired by Umberto Eco's How to Write a Thesis. I think it's the translation into English. And the example is that that many students, the professor observed, just copy a lot of articles, and the book was written in the 70s, so copying articles was 20% of the students' job in the library, time-wise at least. And they copied a lot of articles, but didn't read them actually. And this was the collector's fallacy Umberto Eco described. But if you generalize it, any kind of feeling stuck or being stuck in this chain of value creation is some form of collector's fallacy. And I committed for the collector's fallacy, for example, many years. Because before I met my wife, I thought I will always stick to my ivory tower. And my plan was to just do research, work the least amount for money as possible, and just be like a brain in the tank. So perhaps a brain in the tank going sometimes on a walk. This would be a good description of my life back then. So what I did was basically just filling up my ZettelKasten and not filling up in a passive way, but developing things, but never thought about publishing it, but just let it dribble out of my ZettelKasten as I use. So this is like also a collector's fallacy, or a version of collector's fallacy. So the notes that you are taking now are just a way to bridge the gap from this talk. If you have a ZettelKasten to the ZettelKasten, and the ZettelKasten is then just a tool to produce better actions and text. So this is the difference, and it's most of the time you can't do this value adding stuff when you take notes during a speech or a talk, a meeting, or whatnot. So you just write. Normally, my recommendation would be to just write down as much as you can in a good way, and then when you actually process the notes, then the value adding can happen.
I got another comment later, but Mark's been patiently waiting, so let him go. Thank you for that, by the way.
Thank you. I have two questions. One for Sascha in particular on the ZettelKasten methodology. And the second one would be like a sort of Tinderbox question for all the Tinderbox users in the forum. Sascha, one thing, I have been writing a dissertation now for like 5 years. I have a system which I call ZettelKasten. It's based on the website, and I read several books about it. I have approximately 5,000 notes on it, 6,000 notes. What I usually do is I read something and I make a note of what I read, and it's my own interpretation, my own thought about it, and I put it. And what I did is I have several chapters in my book to come, and I have kind of made a division in the file according to the chapters. And some time ago, I worked with Michael on making the numbers. So there was an automatic numbering system, which we created in Tinderbox. That comes in very handy. But the key question for me here is, if you work like 5 years, at some point, you tend to forget what you wrote 5 years ago. And if I have a very important point that I really want to address, I would like to also use the notes that I had 5 years ago, which are relevant to me for the current point I'm working on. So if you do not have this in special folders, you tend to forget about what you wrote 5 years ago. So then you come across them, because I am a disciplined person. So sometimes I come across the note that I made 5 years ago, but sometimes I do not. And that is kind of so my ZettelKasten question would be, how do you keep track of notes from 5 years ago? Is there like an indexing system, or like if you if you take the example of your dog, I mean, you won't know in 5 years' time that you had a walk with your dog. And if you need the note on what you did with the dog, how would you get to this particular note in 5 years' time? And the second question for me, this is for the forum, is I also started to use the ZettelKasten methodology for my work environment. I do many things, and they're all interconnected to each other. Now, the question for me is, do I, and to some extent, even my PhD is related to my work. So then you end up in the point like, okay, do I make one file, or do I make like 10 files? Or how do you set up the ZettelKasten as a big system into Tinderbox? By one file.
And just be clear on your topic, Mark. When you say file, you mean, do I make one Tinderbox file, or do I make 10 Tinderbox files, like a Word document?
That's what I asked. That's what I asked. Yes.
Looks like Per's got a comment on that.
Right. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that, and for me, it has to be one Tinderbox file, because otherwise, I will lose the chances to find those connections. And I think with the modern computer, those files can be huge in Tinderbox today without any lag and stuff. So for me, that's a very clear decision. I would never ever divide my ZettelKasten into different documents, because then I will lose the power of Tinderbox, basically, I think, by doing so.
So going back to Sascha's point earlier, though, I agree with you on that to an extent, but it also, there's context with that. So for example, what I found is, especially when I'm doing client work, I don't want to, there will be situations where I agree. Most of my work's done in about 1 to 4 files. But when I start doing client work, I find myself wanting to then isolate that client work amongst anything else. So then I copy assets from a core file into the client file so that they stay isolated.
Right, but that's, I think, Sascha's, I mean, a ZettelKasten, if you apply that thinking, that whole sort of toolbox, then the ZettelKasten would be one system, but then obviously you could have your quick notes that you took now, Michael, when Sascha was talking. That is in a different document. And when I'm writing on a paper, I have another document that I work in. But to have the knowledge management system that ZettelKasten is, then those notes that are sort of curated and made relevant in all those ways that Sascha mentioned, those I think have to be in the same, because otherwise they will not be searchable and linkable.
Perhaps, but I do think there's some strategies here. And then again, I don't want to dominate this, but if what I've been experiencing lately though is there's some functional benefits in separating Tinderbox files. And Sascha, we haven't really gotten to this yet as another question of like, what are the tools of ZettelKasten? And I think there's a tendency for us to want to find that Uber all tool that solves everything. When in reality, my experience, especially through Tinderbox, is Tinderbox is one of the most universal tools I've been able to find, but it still doesn't do everything. And so like for me, what I find is Tom Diaz put me onto this application called Foxtrot, which is an application that allows you to do search against XML files. So when I want to search across Tinderbox files, I use Foxtrot, and I'm then able to do the discovery that Sascha was talking about, as opposed to just saying, I'm only going to use Tinderbox. I'm going to use the entire Mac OS environment as my Tinderbox. And there's different UIs, different utilities, different views, different tools that I'll be using to access all of that information on my Mac OS hard drive. So that's kind of my approach to it. As I've evolved on that, I found different tools for different parts of the job. Do you want to retort to that, or do we want to pop over to Phil? Or
I could just. I mean, that's fine if that works. Obviously, you can do whatever you want. But what I think is Tinderbox strengths, which is why I don't use, for instance, the archive and these sort of specialized that are perfectly built for the original ZettelKasten. But what Tinderbox can do is to visualize. I mean, I work a lot in map view in Tinderbox. I capture note in the in the list view, but then make connections in the map view, and then the hyperbolic view when you don't really know, when you have this massive ZettelKasten with a lot of links, it shows you everything that is connected. And that, I think, all those functionality in Tinderbox you will lose if you step out of Tinderbox to use other tools to build some sort of ZettelKasten version. So I think,
undoubtedly, the other comment I might want to add to this, though, there is the potential when you get really large files like Mr. Anderson and I work on, and you've got literally 20,000 action codes running behind the scenes. If you've not optimized those, that can create edge cases. But in a very rare case, 99.99% of the people won't fall into that. Yeah, Sascha, go ahead.
I think I can combine both issues. So the first question by Mark was how to make sure that you stumble upon the file that is useful in your current context, but taken like 8 years ago or 5 years ago. And I do it by placing links in anticipation when the node becomes relevant. So that means, for example, when I take notes on my dog, because my dog is like really difficult to train. So I use my ZettelKasten to assist the knowledge part of it. And it's, for example, the last time it was relevant was when I wrote a note about how God communicates, and it was about the topic of punishment. And I made a connection between the difference between punishment and correction. And in the content, it is not relevant the content is not actually relevant to the discussion, but it's when for example, now let's say I would write about a comment on the Bible or some theological stuff, on an atheist book, or I don't know. So something about God. When I would write on it, and I would use the areas of my ZettelKasten about all the communicating with God content, I would find a link and a comment that there's a similarity between what I wrote about punishment by God and punishment by dogs. And then the note will resurface then again. So it's the part of the work in the ZettelKasten is backwards and forward linking. And by backward and forward link, I mean manual linking. So I don't see a big utility in backlinks, because backlinks are created automatically by the system and are not contextualized by yourself. So you basically have a link list in the backlink widget in whatever. I don't know how it's in Tinderbox if you can access the backlinks. So they might be useful for navigation and quickly using your mouse. But it's not very useful, in my opinion, to use it as a trail of the actual knowledge, because it sticks to the file and not to the content. And the link comment, so when I explicitly state why nodes are connected in the body of the node, then the link actually becomes humanly understandable. And yeah, I think that from the ZettelKasten perspective, having everything in one Tinderbox file would be, or it's more ZettelKasten-like, because there is, from the ZettelKasten perspective, there is actually just one piece of knowledge that you have in your life, so to say. And I can recognize the need to have a different tool or a different thing, but I would be surprised if it's not feasible in Tinderbox to have it all in one Tinderbox file, because when I tried out Tinderbox to get to understand it a little bit, I feel that it has awesome self-scaling properties. So when you go, I don't know how the naming works. So when I create a box on my map view and I click on it and I zoom into it, then to me at least it feels that I'm then in a special place, and all other things are basically just ignored. And this is how the ZettelKasten would or works in that way. So you zoom in on one area, and you zoom in on an area of a couple hundred of nodes, and you can ignore all the other stuff, which is actually a very important utility in any kind of bigger knowledge management system, to be able to ignore most of your system. And it mirrors the ability of us to concentrate, because I'm only able to speak now because I can ignore a plethora of information of my bottle, of my dog, of everything. And my brain basically works by ignoring almost everything that I can perceive. And the ZettelKasten is like pretty similar.
Perfect. Lewis, you've been patiently waiting.
Hi, thank you, Sascha. This is extremely useful and interesting. I have a sort of a way links back to Michael's questions, but also but a few others. I'm a professor. I'm just retired professor. I do work in a advanced social theory, so there's a lot of textual work, right? It happens to be on Jürgen Habermas and other related critical theory, but also Luhmann, of course. So the core reading that you do, of course, as you know, in this field is very dense. You're trying to interpret paragraphs that often have, multiple complex ideas in them, and you're trying to capture them in a way that, as you've pointed out, is replicable and memorable for the future, and also linkable. I'm wondering how you handle this very specific problem of reading very dense texts. How do you take notes on dense texts? Do you literally, for example, as Michael was saying, or parallel, take relatively quick notes? Habermas or Luhmann or whoever says X and Y in this paragraph in the context of trying to outline a larger argument. If it's in the second context, trying to outline a larger argument, where does that larger argument, that bigger frame, reside in relation to the very specific kind of arguments that you might be taking. I'm not sure if this is a clear question or not, but if it isn't, we can drop it and go on.
No, it's perfectly clear because it's one of the eternal problems of creating a bigger project, because it's always this nested kind of argumentation and thinking. So the first type, or it's actually one can learn a lot from physicists. Physicists are the ones with the numbers, and physicians are the ones with the bodies, I think. Yeah. So
Yes. Hopefully the physicists also have bodies, but yes.
Yeah, okay. The physicists do a lot of writing just to come to a tiny conclusion. That means like 10 pages of calculations, and then there are just two lines of math that is actually then ends up in a paper. And this is what I would think is just an extension of the working memory. So it has another quality. The problem is we don't have enough words for it. So it's both notes in English. In German, I think it would be, you would also just call it Notizen. So when you use notes or note-taking as a means to understanding, it's not actually what I would say, it's not actually value created, but it's more or less the process of value creation. So if you would take notes on that, you would crystallize and make it retrievable how you came up to the conclusion. So it might be important for you later. So for example, if you have like a paragraph that's like really hard to understand, then you might take a lot of notes. And for example, if you let's say you take 2 weeks for a paragraph to understand it and make notes, then of course you need to keep the notes at least for the period where you need or when you need to understand the paragraph, and you need to come back to them in a week to actually have them accessible to understand it. But in the end, I think most of the time it is most valuable to then have the end results similar to a physicist, to a physicist, that he has just the 2 lines that ends up in the article. So the other part is how to create this nesting. It's I would create, for example, I call it a structure node, and a structure node is basically just a node on other nodes, or can be seen as a thinking canvas. So when I think about something and I try to build it bottom up, I just create a structure node with a topic, and the first line is my actual goal. So it could mean I want to create, I don't know, I want to create, or the goal of the node to actually to explore what thinking tools actually are. So for example, this would be more example of my work. And then I just use it as a thinking canvas and re-edit and re-edit and re-edit, and then have the bigger outline whenever something gets too big. So then I push it out to another node, and and this process repeats and repeats. And what happens is that the first node becomes more or less an entry point, and you have the bigger outline of the whole thing, and the details will be pushed more and more out to other nodes. And the end result is some form of hierarchical structure, but because you can have multiple crosslinks, if you would map it out, it would be not strictly hierarchical, but more similar to a heterarchy, I would say. But this is the process, and I think the benefit or the upside of the process like this is that you don't have to be on top of the bigger picture all the time, because you can concentrate on one thinking step at a time, and then let the method or your software like push the details out. So you have the bigger picture on the one side and the details on the other side, and then you can use this as a tool to write the text later on.
Can I just do a quick follow-up, Michael? I don't want to take up too much time, but so I'm just using an example. It's a simple one. It's, well, it's not that simple, but it's, so I'm dealing with the concept of the life world or Lebenswelt right now, right? So the Lebenswelt can have, the life world can have, this is a comparison in Habermas's theory of communicative action between his concept and the transcendental phenomenological concept. So it's philosophy and then a very specific concept that he's developing. Very large concept. The life world itself is a huge concept. Then there are two subdivisions. One is in the philosophical phenomenological tradition. The second is in the social theoretical tradition. And each of those, of course, can branch outward or downward. So in what you're just describing, there, if I'm hearing you correctly, there'd be a kind of life world note that would be a summary note, as it were. This is more or less the concept of the life world, and it branches out to these the phenomenological set of notes on the one hand, the social theoretical notes on the other, each of which itself has multiple subcomponents.
I would think so.
Back. Okay, so it's kind of like a hierarchical tree, but it functions horizontally, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
exactly.
Thank you.
All right, Dominique. Hey, and Lou, could you rephrase your question for me in the text? I asked you a question in the chat. Dominique, go for it.
Yes, I have a question about the way to take notes in Tinderbox. I was thinking about Montaigne, French writer. You maybe know, you certainly have heard about. And Montaigne used to rewrite incessantly his writings. In fact, essays, Montaigne essays, are notes about notes, and the essays are only a sum of notes. And I was wondering why don't we simply insert, when we have to write something, an article, for instance, why don't we simply insert our notes, our thought into the text we are currently writing? Why taking notes in Tinderbox or another tool? Why don't we do just like Montaigne did? I mean, not taking notes, but writing. And for me, maybe I can show you something about the way I take notes in Tinderbox. I can show you my screen.
Sure, go for it.
This is a recent file I built in Tinderbox, and this is my sleep box. For me, why taking notes? Because I can have multiple view about the thought I have. When I write an article, for instance, I take notes about my notes rather than writing directly the article. So I have a structure, a lot of structured notes. And as you can see, I can have multiple view about my notes, whether I watch to my notes in the outline view or in the chart view. For instance, I like the way Tinderbox let me see my notes in that kind of view, chart view, because it's very idiosyncratic, it's a really personal way of working, but because I can simply have an overview of my notes. And this is the reason why I take notes in Tinderbox. not only to write, but to build something that I can see emerging.
Mm-hmm. Okay, can you summarize the question though, or was there a specific question? I'm not sure I'm clear.
The question was, why don't we simply write what we have to write more rather than taking notes into ZettelKasten tool?
Sascha?
So the first reason is that there are two different contexts. The first one is your own personal context that is more systematic. So when I think about some issue, I don't have any concerns for didactics, for example. So I don't introduce concepts in the beginning to use them later or something like that. So this is one of the major difficulties, or not difficult, one of the major where you need to put extra work in when you want to write with your ZettelKasten. So you need to recontextualize what you think into the context of the linear text. That means that you make sure that you have an introduction, that you introduced concepts in the beginning, and so on and so forth. When I'm writing in my ZettelKasten, I don't have any concerns for that. So that is the difference that I feel. As a side note, that was, by the way, how Luhmann worked in the end. So the ZettelKasten was too much work for him. And then he basically, when he wrote a note, he had a collection of manuscript. And when the note fit, or would fit, he would just put it in to the manuscript where it might be proper. So I think it's mainly, or the analog version of the ZettelKasten is much more work, especially when it gets bigger. And I think because it was towards the end of his lifetime, he got more in a hurry. So I think this is the main reason. The second reason is that you can use, or when you focus on one node and one node only, you can remove all the distractions from the text in total. That means that you can actually zoom in on one thought and develop it fully. What I call develop it fully. That means, in my case, I try to force myself to develop all 5 value-giving aspects and connect it to all kinds of other stuff that I wouldn't if I would just focus on the thought within the context of an essay. And the third one is that it's much more easy to reuse a note when it's not written, or when it's not written as a part of an essay. So it is more movable. That would be those would be my 3 reasons.
All right, Dominic, anything more on that? Otherwise, I've got a couple observations, comments.
No, I think Montaigne would have written his essays with Tinderbox.
Mm-hmm.
I think seriously.
Okay, so a couple comments. You mentioned that point about Luhmann nearing the end. Maybe he got busy or something like that. But I want to harken back to something you said earlier, though, and that if you lost your ZettelKasten today, you wouldn't be as concerned because your brain has basically become your ZettelKasten. Right? Mm-hmm. And so, is it possible that Luhmann got to a point where he didn't necessarily need the analog tool as much because his brain itself was becoming the ZettelKasten? He spent years training his mind to do that automatically. So there might be a balance of between that. There's something there, I think.
It's perfectly possible, but to be honest, when I looked into Luhmann's Zettel, I was pretty shocked that it was so I don't know how the word is. It was sloppy. To be honest, it was just sloppily written down. Just thoughts, and I think he used it more as a way to as a creative engine. So he browsed his ZettelKasten. Oh, this is just my theory, so this is not proven by any empirical research yet, though I think I will be proven right, or that the evidence will support my my conclusion. So he took the notes, and with a combination of what he already knew, it's not like you have a ZettelKasten and then you stop learning about anything. So he knew quite a lot, and then he used the combination of the creative impulses that the notes gave him, and it show and his knowledge, and then he wrote the article, and it actually shows in a bad way in his writing, because when you actually look up how or what sources he references for what claims, it's not so diligently, to put it mildly.
Got it. Okay, I have two other questions, and we'll move to Per and Dominique again. Is that the term ZettelKasten? Is it process? Is it when we use to the word tool, we often think software, the hammer, like something physical, or in the context of computing, a piece of software. What is ZettelKasten? Is it a process? Is the process itself a tool, or are there other tools? And can we separate the distinction between process and tool? And so is ZettelKasten more of a way of life and a way of thinking, or is it an actual tool? And if it is an actual tool, what is what's the best one, or how do we approach that?
I think this distinction this distinction stems from a certain line of thinking where you actually are willing to distinguish the state and the process. And if you ask yourself, okay, what is a toolbox a tool, or is the method how to use the tools embedded in the toolbox? So can you distinguish, for example, between a carpenter with all his knowledge and all the internalized processes, how to attack problems, and his toolbox? And I think you can, but in the end, to understand the whole process, you need to have a holistic view of the knowledge of a carpenter, the techniques, and the tools, or the physical tools you use. And the same, I think, applies to the ZettelKasten method. I try to refer to the ZettelKasten thing most of the time as a method, because I think the method is more important than the ZettelKasten as a tool, because the ZettelKasten it's just a bunch of nodes that are linked together, and this is all you can get on the surface of a node. The magic of the ZettelKasten manifests itself when you bring in what you actually can. So if you are an engineer, you build up an engineering ZettelKasten with all the engineering content and the way how engineers think. And on the other side of the spectrum, more or less, would be an artist, and the artist would link very differently. So it's not part of the method that you have certain kind of links, or a link typology, or node types that you apply with templates or such, but you would have your own idiosyncratic version of the ZettelKasten. And so I think the distinguishing,
I think that's really important, though, because when we go out there, so many, and we experience this a lot in the Tinderbox community, people are looking for the answer. How do I do it? And what I'm hearing you is, you can get started, but at some point it's how you do it, not how I do it, not how Bruce does it, not how Mark does it. It's how individual chooses to do it, by marrying the method with their own sense of self, and whatever tool or tools that they, their toolbox, if you will, that they pull together to help them navigate this thing we call life and knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. I think the illusion, or it depends what you bring, what you bring to the problem. So if you don't know how an argument functions, you can't take note of an argument fully. So if you can distinguish, for example, between premises and conclusions, it sounds sometimes, if you are surrounded by academics, it sounds sometimes a little bit basic to say that, but I even talked to a lot of engineers who didn't distinguish between argument and justification, for example. And if you talk to a philosopher, the philosopher would, I think, cry if he would witness such a sin against the formality. And yeah, I think this is where some formality would be beneficial, to think about the general and the general properties, how knowledge works, with justification, with truth, what is evidence, what's the difference between theoretical reasoning and empirical evidence, and so on and so forth. And if you have that down, then yeah, basically it's just you and your idiosyncrasies.
Perfect. Per.
Right. I just wanted to go back really quick to your question, Michael, about, I mean, Luhmann stopped using his own ZettelKasten in the end. I mean, I have to say that, I mean, to my knowledge, Luhmann died of cancer, and he knew that he was dying for several years. So I guess if you know that and you just wanted to get stuff done, he wasn't thinking about future much in the end. And I think if you're thinking about the future, I mean, to go back to Dominic's question, I think I've been stuck early on in my career only focusing on the publications one by one. And now when I'm further on in my career, obviously I can cite myself, but all the thoughts that I had when I wrote those articles, those are lost. The only end product I have is the published paper, which I can cite, and that's great and all of that. But I think to use a ZettelKasten method, whatever you want to call it, use notes and use some tool that you can help you find and make connections and link, that you're building your knowledge. And it could be serendipity that make you find stuff, but you can also do very formal searches in a tool like Tinderbox, for instance, not just to capture your idea on the notes that you're sort of curating and making nice and you know, suitable to be turned into Zettel, but also then when you have made that, to make sure that you spend some time to actually actively look. And Tinderbox is a great tool for finding those connections. And if you make those connections, then you have something more than the final paper. You have something that you will use for coming papers and coming ideas and so on. So that, I think, is why Luhmann stopped, was that he knew that this was his final couple of books. I guess that's just my guess, but I would stop thinking about the future if I knew I was dying, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, Mark.
Michael, just to get back to your question, you just asked about if it's a tool or methodology or whatever you call it. In my perception, but Sascha can perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, is the ZettelKasten is for me a sort of knowledge database, and it can be done in Tinder. It can also be done in other, let's say, IT tools. It can also be on paper, technically, because that's what Luhmann did. So for me, the knowledge database is something which I use to develop something. For example, in my book, I have several scientific methodologies that I use, and I use my knowledge database to kind of reason according to the scientific methodology I have to stick to. And the tool for me is just as an IT tool. So for me, I can use Tinderbox because I really like it. But there's also people I know who use Scrivener or who use other tools, depending on the size of your knowledge database. And I even saw an example of people using DevonThink Pro to do the ZettelKasten. So it really depends on your personal preference and also on your skills, because you have some challenges also when you use Tinderbox, of course, that you really have to know how the IT works before you can properly use it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Okay, Sascha, I have another comment I wanted to bring up. earlier you said Tinderbox is about text. And I think with such a dramatic, definitive statement of that nature, I can, I wanted to circle back on that a little bit, because I think I think in many ways you're right, because you were writing notes, we're taking notes, it's about text. And that's one of the beautiful things about the tool Tinderbox, in that it is really this incredible utility for multidimensional text transformation. But one thing I would like to be able to, and as is, just to be fair and from a logical perspective, Rome does a good job, Obsidian does a good job, Evernote can do a job for people. I mean, there are different tools for people to be able to manipulate and manage their text really well. I personally have become a acolyte of Mr. Bernstein and Tinderbox. The issue, but when we say something in the nature of Tinderbox, notes are really primarily about, or ZettelKasten is primarily about managing text. There is an opportunity to miss the fact that you can use tools like Tinderbox to not just manipulate text, but actually to interject images as well, interject audio, interject video within the context of a note and within the relevance of a note. Because in some ways, especially because of the very nature of Tinderbox and the ability to actually have preview, have output, that if you think about it, what is a video? What is an audio file? Or what is an image? It's text, right? So to the extent that you were to happen to interject the text path of a video file, an audio file, or an image, or if you paste in a whole file, Tinderbox just converts that to text behind the scenes. You can be manipulating that rich media as well within a ZettelKasten concept. So I think it's useful for, I would think, for people to, or for me at least, to accept and recognize that it can be more than just text if you kind of broaden your mind a little bit. What's your reaction to that kind of statement?
So I want to make sure I understand what you said correctly. So you are saying,
well, so let me give you an example. So in the context of Tinderbox, so here we go. Let me pull up this file. So as everyone knows, I am putting on an event leveraging and using Tinderbox. So I got to share my screen here. Share screen. Okay, so I've got my screen share. And and again, to your point of leveraging Tinderbox to be able to get rid of the noise, let's say I just want to focus on the handful of notes that I now have as quotes. And if I look at this quote, I can say, okay, here's some text. Somebody said, last year's event was amazing. Here's Eric that's, saying, which is, I really like this one. Technology will not distinguish between good and bad actors if human beings are unwilling to incapable to distinguish between good and bad actors. Right. So that's a quote I have on somebody. That's some text. And that quote is related to the person's name, their publication year. What's interesting about this, using the concept of ZettelKasten, because I'll be creating some quotes about you later. So let's say I go up here and I'm just going to use my name for now. And this is the beautiful thing about linking notes. So if I go here and now link this person, Michael Becker, to this note that I just created, and I say, he said some cool stuff, you'll see what Tinderbox is automatically doing is pulling up relevant information from that note Michael Becker that was linked to into this note to help with that context. And then I can go ahead in here and provide a year if I had a citation key and all of that. So at this point, it is primarily just about text. But now I can then turn around and I can actually put a template to that, visualize it, and you can see I'm actually pulling an image into that note. So it's not just about text, because the template is basically grabbing the text that is this image, pulling the path from where that image exists for me to be able to display it. Moreover, when you start getting better with the visualizations and outputs, and Mark's doing this really cool thing in the backstage called postering, which will be eventually coming out soon. You can actually apply different templates. So for example, the template I just showed you was this one called quote, but now I'm going to quickly change a different quote. And now I get a completely different visualization on that note, right? And so your notes can actually become images. And then when you do that, And the beautiful thing about Tinderbox is I'm now writing some command line code that will automatically capture that that image. And so now I have a Zettel that is just that image itself. So if I ever want to go recall that image, not just the text of the quote, the image in itself has now become a Zettel, which then can be linked by a citation key, by a term, by all of that. So just limiting the concept of ZettelKasten to text, especially in today's day and age, I think is kind of artificially limiting, is my comment.
Mm-hmm.
What is your reaction to that?
I share your opinion on imagery, and this is one thing I often encourage. So more visual thinkings. Image is and drawing graphs is actually an important. It's just a thinking tool. So the content of each node can be visual. What I don't see, for example, is the benefit on more, so audio, for example. I'm not quite sure how a musician would do it. So a musician would, I don't know how a musician can use the ZettelKasten yet. I have some ideas, but it's, yeah, perhaps it's just wording. I think it's wording.
So let me react to that comment though. So I've seen it in a couple things. Especially with modern tools. So if you're using something like Otter AI, that audio file can be automatically converted to text. Mm-hmm. So that text now can be manipulated. The URL or path to that audio file can be added to a note. And so, for example, I spent about 15 hours yesterday doing qualitative data analysis for my dissertation. And I did just that, converted the audio file to text, put that into my Tinderbox, started parsing all of that out into individual Zettels. But if the audio was garbled, I had a link to the audio file as a piece of text. Here's the URL path to that audio file. So I could quickly pull up the original audio file and listen to what that text was to be able to then get it back, because the translation or the transcription was poor in that one part. So I think there's, in our multidimensional world, I think there's value by linking not just text to text, by linking text to media.
Yeah, but that would, or I would draw a different boundary. So the audio files, for example, would be source material that I would put just outside of the ZettelKasten.
Yeah. No, they don't exist. No, but it's part of the ZettelKasten process. That's my point. I'm not saying put the audio file in the ZettelKasten, but you are in a sense putting the audio file in a ZettelKasten if in that context you put a link to it.
I think we might lose ourselves then in rhetorics or in the different concepts, because what the ZettelKasten, or what I say is the ZettelKasten, so the thing, not the method, are the link nodes, so the hypertext. And you could link with advances in technology. You could even have an purely audio-based ZettelKasten somehow, but this wouldn't change the nature of the ZettelKasten, and the audio would be also text, also with images. So what I do, for example, let's say a use case would be using my ZettelKasten to journal on some traveling. Then I would put a map on a node. And then I would number my number where then I draw a line where my travel line, where I traveled. And then on the travel path, I would mark the stages on or the positions where I took notes. And then I have a list. So I have a map, I have the travel line, and then the individual nodes would be attached to the position.
And I do think we're saying the same thing in that case. In that case, as I just demonstrated, for me, in my Tinderbox, in my ZettelKasten, the image isn't there. The text of the image is there, aka its name and its file path. So it's in all functionally within the ZettelKasten, it's text. You're right. The issue is when you go to manipulate it and produce output, then that starts getting a little bit different.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. Per.
Right. I think, I mean, with this discussion here, I think it's very important to distinguish between data, information, and knowledge here. And I think for me, when I'm thinking about a ZettelKasten, that's the system where I put knowledge and try to link. But so data, if I have an image that I'm analyzing, that will not be part of, that will not be included in the box that I call the ZettelKasten, but it would be my conclusions about the analysis that may be relevant for future instances and so on that I will put in. So I think if there's an image, I know Tinderbox can do a lot of more things than I mean, myriad of other things than hosting a ZettelKasten. But for me, a ZettelKasten is that notion of having a place where I can put knowledge snippets and I can relate them to each other and I can link them and then sort of, you know, build continuously. So I think an image that is just to make it look good, that has no additional meaning for the knowledge management that I'm trying to accomplish. But if it's like some figure that explains a complex relationship or something, that could be in it, what Sascha mentioned before, I think. But the distinction, I think, where I draw the line is if it's just data, then that's not going to be entered into the ZettelKasten. That's going to be part of the process before I enter this note into the ZettelKasten. So for me, that's the boundary that I draw.
Nice. Mark.
Sorry, I can just echo that comment by Per. I have in my PhD notes, ZettelKasten notes, if I have a source, I would link that. I can copy paste the link to, for example, I use DevonThink. So then I would put the link in it. So I would not put the source itself in it. Yeah, it may be a picture, can of course be something that is of additional information to my thought, to my note. But normally I would, just as Per indicates, put it separately in for me, the DevonThink or anywhere else.
No, I agree. And I think that's what I just demonstrated, right? My images are not in the Tinderbox file. They're, as many people do, they're out of my hard drive because that's not a place for them to be, or they'll be in doesn't work well in DevonThink for technical reasons. But this goes back to what I had asked Sascha way back in the very beginning of the conversation. Is this just about collecting and taking notes, or for the purposes of some output? You know, and would the ZettelKasten process method / tool also be beneficial for helping facilitate more efficient output? And that's one of the greatest benefits I get from using Tinderbox, is because I've now literally got tens of thousands of notes in my Tinderbox files. My output is sickeningly efficient. You know, I can produce reports very quickly now because of the templates and the output, and I don't need to go search for the images because the images are there in context of the note. So when I want to go produce that quote or produce that report, I don't have to go looking around for everything. It all just assembles itself. And I think that's part of for me, that's part of the process or part of the method. Sascha, Mark, anybody, you want to react to that comment?
Yeah, what I started to do basically is, if I write really text, as you suggest, it's like production, I kind of do that not in Tinderbox because I would say it costs too much time. So I used the Tinderbox as the ZettelKasten tool to formulate my thoughts, but they are thoughts in the thought process. And once you get to the stage that you have to write a paragraph, for me, that would be different, because then you start to look at how you word things and how you choose your wording correctly and precisely. And for me, I do it in English, so I even have to think harder than if it would be my mother tongue. So for me, the writing process is not in Tinderbox, but I can perfectly imagine somebody prefers to use the tools, of course, to export and use the Tinderbox functionality for that.
Yeah, and again, just to be clear, I mean, we a lot of us do that too. I mean, there are many people that will use Tinderbox and then export to a Scrivener or something like that. As I've demonstrated, I probably produced 1,500 pages of sold commercial reports this year, 100% published out of Tinderbox. So it can be done for those. And I would actually argue, and we don't have to do it right now, but I would argue this idea of it not being efficient is, well, what is the inefficiency you're losing when you're having to port over to another tool? What is the inefficiency that you're losing when you now have got two sources of truth, your Tinderbox notes, and now the thing you've written over here? And invariably, you will have created new thoughts and ideas when you were writing that final piece. And if those get, and we argued earlier about 20 minutes ago that why would we not want everything into our one Tinderbox file? Because if they're across multiple Tinderbox files, that creates a level of inefficiency. Writing in another tool is an example of separating your Tinderbox file from other notes, thoughts, and ideas that you're producing. So I do think there's something we can explore there later. And that's, again, one of the, for me, the beauties of Tinderbox export code and action code is the ability to write these templates. And once you figure that templating process out, it opens up the entire world. Sascha, do you have any comments, thoughts on any of this? We got about 10 minutes left, 9 minutes left. So how would you want to wrap this up? And then anybody that has any last minute questions or comments.
Oh, wrapping, I don't wrap anything up. I just want to comment I think as far as I can estimate the power of Tinderbox, it reminds me actually a little bit of Emacs. So you can do anything everywhere on your system with Tinderbox. So this is kind of how I feel right now. And I think, I think you are mixing the ZettelKasten, so the knowledge database, with all the functionality of the tool of the Tinderbox. So a Tinderbox is not the ZettelKasten, but Tinderbox is, it looks to me as it's a powerful software ecosystem of what you can do on your computers, something like that. So ZettelKasten is how Per put it, in my opinion, correctly. It's about your knowledge. And then, of course, when your tool also can do all the outputs, like you describe it, then the tool does it, but it's not that it's part of the ZettelKasten and the ZettelKasten method.
So you made something important. So when you said Tinderbox is not a ZettelKasten, so it sounds like Tinderbox, can I see if we can correct that? Could Tinderbox be a ZettelKasten and all of these other things, or is Tinderbox not a ZettelKasten?
No, as far as I understand it, your Tinderbox can be first used as a ZettelKasten.
There you go.
But it looks like that you use it as a ZettelKasten, and the ZettelKasten is just one tiny thing in your whole Tinderbox ecosystem.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Any other thoughts, comments from people? We've got about 7 minutes left. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. It's been pretty awesome. Any other ideas? So, okay, let's think about this. So we've been talking about Tinderbox. One of the beautifully glorious things about this community, and especially Mark Bernstein, is the openness to talking about what might be perceived as competitive tools, right? We actually approach these conversations every week with this idea of knowledge first, problem solving first. And Tinderbox doesn't necessarily solve every knowledge problem or such. What other, and I've already brought up like Zone, or we've already heard things like DevonThink, Roam, Obsidian. Obviously, we've been discussing Tinderbox. Are there other tools that people could be looking at or exploring in your mind to be helping them with this journey that we're on and that we've been talking about? Because you've done a great job explaining the methods. How might people find that tool that will, or set of things that will help them implement, execute these methods?
A question for me?
Yeah.
Of course, I think the software we build is the best thing on earth, but in reality, as long as the software can create notes, create links, and you are quick to browse it, you are good to go.
And that software, so it's called the archive, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the archive is more geared towards being distraction-free environment. So it's more it's very similar, or it's built on the shoulders of NVAlt, but
I'm sorry, on the shoulders of who?
NVAlt. Oh, isn't it common? I thought NVAlt is like this legendary note-taking app. It's
never heard of it. Sorry, that's my ignorance. Sorry.
Oh no, I'm pretty sure I'm the most ignorant person now in the room regarding software and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's pretty simple, and I think, or I would rather say, the complement to Tinderbox, I feel, is a distraction-free editor, because one of the main issues we now have, firstly, cultural, is distraction. So we have a huge pressure on our working memory, and that means less space is available to compute actually the stuff we want to think about. And I design my the surface, my monitor, my screen, like that. So I want to be very few items on the screen when I think, and I want a clear thinking canvas. And I think Tinderbox, so the downside of Tinderbox, in my opinion, is that its power, its seemingly immense power, comes with a lot of visual distraction and a lot of complexity in the visuals. And to complement it, I think a distraction-free editor would be nice. Or Tinderbox can be a distraction-free environment also, and then it's capable of even that.
Yeah, no, it can be, but as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. So yeah. Very easy to get distracted. Perry, you have a final comment?
Yeah, I think, Sascha, if you're going to continue to play around with Tinderbox after this, obviously the archive is the tool that is most sort of faithful to the ZettelKasten, Luhmann ZettelKasten method. It's basically you're doing the same thing, but digitally, which will then be a huge step, obviously, away from Luhmann's work. But I think if you have time to consider, continue to look at Tinderbox. Tinderbox has a view which is basically a list view, right? Mm-hmm. So you can work largely when you're dealing with your thoughts and stuff in a list view, when you basically just have your different notes in a list. But I think the power of Tinderbox is that when you have made the connections, you can visualize. And research show that in the Western world, 80% of us are visual learners. And I think that's the added thing. So you can choose where you work in. But I think the downside of Tinderbox is that I think the learning curve is actually quite daunting. When you have to be to use Tinderbox as your ZettelKasten tool of choice, you will have to invest a lot more, I think. The archive is you just use it. You start and then you use it exactly as the book tells you to use ZettelKasten, and it works. And Tinderbox, I think, is super powerful. I think way more powerful because of that. You can use the visual tools, but you will have to set up your own system, and the learning curve will be it's a bigger hurdle to get started. That's my final point.
Awesome. Okay, a couple minutes left. Anybody else? Mr. Anderson, you've been dutifully quiet. Any parting remarks for us?
No, I've been interested in listening along. The thing I have found interesting but I didn't want to break the flow of things. Is the seeming need to put things like dates in the names of notes. The sort of software can do that for us now. It's visual noise. And I wonder how much of this is pulled through from paper systems. It's not wrong, but I just wonder about that. But that's a minor thing. I found it very interesting.
Mark, the problem is the system often changes the date. So if I download a file that was created on May 1st, and I download it to my system on June 1st, June 1st is now the date of the file, which is incorrect and false.
Yes, that might be true for created or modified, but if you were to produce a user-generated attribute called date that is immutable, you populate that attribute value with that date, the note that was created, and it won't change.
Sure, but what's the difference between then metadata in a file and just part of the file?
Because I think the difference is you're intermixing that. One of the beauties of Tinderbox is you can create purity of concepts, right? So
I'm I'm not talking about Tinderbox. I'm just talking
but
about
I'm saying, but the point being though, is if you're intermixing a date with your text with other stuff, that becomes hard to parse. And I think maybe that's what Mark was trying to refer to. I'm not sure.
Well, I was sorry. I'll try and clarify because time's short. Is that I know a lot of people like to work in map view because it gives you that very visual interaction, and it just seems that effectively putting some metadata that Tinderbox can store in terms of a note standing as proxy, say for a file name that may have may have a name in the OS that for all the reasons that you rightly mentioned, because it is problematic. I've seen that firsthand in a large government department. But I just wondered, when you want to get to the nub of the thing, if you've got a large wodge of a long string of numbers before your eye even tracks to the thing you're reading about, I just wondered if it was, and I may be misunderstanding, but I just wondered if it was necessary in a note or in the title of a note, which is the first thing you interact with, that you needed that, because of course all that metadata can be safely stored in a Tinderbox note as an attribute. That's
right.
Fabulous. Well, everyone, we could obviously continue. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, may I can explain the date in the note. So it's actually just used to provide the file with a unique identifier, and it's in the file name explicitly. Or I started to use it in the file name because in university I accessed my ZettelKasten through the Dropbox homepage, and Dropbox only offered title searches. So the links were functioning as well in Dropbox, and that's why I used it. And it makes possible linking as search. So for example, the archive doesn't link directly, it just uses the search mechanism to show you the exact file, because the strings of course are unique. So you search for the ID and the archive shows you the file that has this ID and this is unique, so the archive can show you the one file. And this is kind of the reasoning is that of course it's visual clutter, and it takes away screen real estate, so to say. So if you are working on a laptop, of course, you are taking away a little bit of space. But to me and to us with Christian together, the upsides outweigh the downsides, because it's more redundant, and it allows you to use any kind of text editor to access your ZettelKasten, because the ZettelKasten, we built our software that the ZettelKasten is actually just a bunch of text files. So the archive is just a handler for that, and you can easily move around between all kinds of editors. And as long as you have a search function, your ZettelKasten will function in the future.
Fantastic. All right. Any other thoughts, ideas, comments, or should we wrap it up? Well, Sascha, on behalf of all of us, thank you, thank you, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. Give him a round of applause.
Oh,
and
no,
I hope to hear you back at some point. This is going to be great.
We will.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Sascha and Michael. Thank you.